Good afternoon. Welcome to Introduction to Commedia dell'arte with your host, me, Lord Knut Bjornsson. I'm sorry in advance. I want to go ahead and apologize. I have some family obligations that popped up kind of late in the week that require me to be unavailable all day Saturday the 18th. So I'm recording this lesson live on the 17th of July 2020 for Royal University of Meridies. For those of you that know me, I'm sorry. For those of you that don't, I will be. No, my name is Knut Bjornsson. I've been in the Society since 2014. I've been doing Commedia since 2017. At my first event, I found an interest in bardic performance, and specifically the dramatic work that doesn't always stage well around a fire. And it just so happens that this rapscallion at the time, in 2014, called Lord Matthias Blackett, took me under his wing and taught me all of what I knew. He and I actually kind of started doing Commedia within about a year and a half of each other. He's way better at it than I am. And he invited me to teach this class today. So, that's where we are. I will tell you that I learned Commedia from a class that Master Matthias taught, and then polished that with several performances and practices and courses with E. Ferenzi, which is a Commedia troupe out of Atlantia. They're great people. If you get a chance to see one of their shows or to take a class by one of their members, do it. They're much better than me. Do it. Really and truly, though, Commedia is probably my preferred performing art. A little bit about me and why I'm teaching this. I do independent film acting and a little bit of stage work mundanely. And a lot of what I've learned in Commedia made that work. I did as well as I did in the auditions that I had because of the improv work. And on the disorganized sets that I have worked on, what I learned in Commedia, things I could fall back on, things that are time-tested over the course of about 500 years, they still work. People still laugh at pretty much the same stuff. So with that, let's get into this. What exactly is Commedia dell'arte? Go ahead, let's hear it. This is a pre-recorded lecture. I can't hear your answers. Commedia dell'arte was a 16th century originated bit of professional comedy. In fact, it literally translates to comedy as a profession. Used to be called something else. A few years earlier, say in 1523, it was called Commedia Improvisada, I think, or de improviso. I may be blending my languages there, but it was improvised comedy. And then as people started doing this style of comedy more, to the point that it was what they were doing as a profession, as a trade, that what they were doing was performing comedy, it became called Commedia dell'arte. It was really groundbreaking for its time. Let me give you some historical background. Prior to about 1523, 1530, somewhere in that range, most of the shows, plays, even the comedies that we saw, were ultimately what were called morality plays. They were church-sponsored. They had strongly religious messages. As a result, the sex and violence and drunkenness and shenanigans were usually played exclusively as very bad things and moral failings that were ultimately overcome or punished pretty harshly. That was how plays were written. And it worked very well for a lot of people for a long time. Until the Italians really developed this form of comedy. And I say Italians, again, there wasn't a contiguous Italian identity, but it was a region at the time. There were several nation-states. So you would get different flavors of comedy in Napoli versus what you'd get over in Rome or anywhere else. And a lot of the troops traveled between these cities. So they needed things that would punch just as well in Napoli as it would anywhere else in the country or in the territory at the time. They needed to be able to go into the Papal States and tell a joke, go to Venice and tell a joke that was very similar. And what you'll find is that they started reverting to these stock characters and stock jokes. That's most of what Commedia dell'arte is. It's also the bones of modern humor. A little bit more about Commedia troupes. They would not buy a theater and go to the theater to practice every day and then put on a show on the weekends. They traveled. They would roll into town on wagons if they had them, or horses, or walking, however they got around, with light sets, very portable, small costumes, things that could pretty well pack down because they were on the road. They'd roll into town on a Monday or a Tuesday, look around, dress like normal people dressed at the time, and they'd kind of figure out what the scuttlebutt was, what the business was, what's going on in this town today. Well, the butcher's daughter looks an awful lot like the priest. They'd figure that out, and they'd start building a show, and they would have a little bit of fun with the people in the town. And they'd start promoting the show about midway through the week, and they would start hawking the show. If you've ever been to a Renaissance fair and seen a performer out doing a small bit of their show to get you to come see them later at the theater, this is very similar to what we saw. As a matter of fact, the Commedia performers, the Commediani, that's what we'll go with. What they would do is they'd take maybe one or two people out of costume and go and put on a little bit, right? And then they'd go and put on their costumes and do another bit across town while two or three other people are doing something on the other side of the marketplace. The goal being to kind of drum up business. These weirdos are in town. They've been saying these horribly funny things. Let's go see what else they have to say. That's worth a couple of ducats. And it was worth a lot of ducats. These people did pretty well. And again, this whole thing kind of grew out of a street performing culture. So it was unique in a lot of ways. We'll get more into what really made it special later, now that you kind of understand what we're dealing with. We're dealing with hour to hour and a half long plays that were made within a week. So this is semi-improvisational. They have an idea of where they're going. What exactly someone's going to say, we'll find out on Saturday night. And then we're getting out of town Sunday before these people get mad about the things they were laughing about the day before. And that's how it worked. It was a traveling life. Commedia itself has been on a bit of a journey. So, Commedia dell'arte, I've got my notes over here, so don't mind while I stare at them. Commedia dell'arte grew directly out of Roman Italian farcical wouldn't that be terrible? No, Commedia dell'arte actually developed from an ancient Roman technique. There were some plays, some farces, comedies of the time that, from the extant pieces we have, maybe 5 or 6 plays that are intact and then another 6 or 7 that are mostly intact or significantly partial, we see some very similar feel to it. Not surprising given that Rome geographically is in Italy. Fancy that. What we saw the relative improvisation. A lot of these plays weren't really written down. A lot of the history we have about this Italian Roman farcical comedy was written down after the fact. It was people writing about the show that they had seen, not people writing down their plays. You know, like Shakespeare wrote down other people's plays. Later. And they used stock characters. So we would see Maccus, who was a fool, or Buccus, who was a cheeky country fool, or we'd use Pappus, the noble man, older fellow, right? And we'd see all of these characters kind of develop, and later we see specifically Pappus develops into a really great character that you see in a lot of Commedia shows called Pantalone. We'll get into it later, but there's a pretty clear progression with that. We also see some origins in Byzantine mime. Miming was not invented in what's now modern France. It was actually in the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. They had mimes who would pantomime things. And I'm not a really good mime. I own that. They would perform, and a lot of that action not having props, but starting to kind of play with the abstract idea that, well, we can tell that he's climbing a ladder, right? Oh, he has thrown something. He was talking about an apple. Somebody was talking about an apple. We start seeing that development happening really in the Byzantine territories. A lot of the hawking and the patter that was used came from jugglers who would perform in the street, juggle things for a little bit, give me some coins, you watched the show. And also from charlatans, people who would come in and hawk miracle cures or sell potions or diagnose exactly what was wrong with you. They've got just a little bit of the cure left, and they'll sell it to you. And then again in 1523 we see historical accounts of an actor called Angelo Bellocco, who was called Il Rusante, which translates to the Rusante. And some of the other people starting to develop these Zani character types, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Now, what Commedia was and where it came from really makes more sense in a context of where it went. Because it hasn't really gone away. It has shifted. It has changed significantly. But we still see a lot of the Commedia dell'arte methodology employed. So, of course, we started with street performances, later built into ramshackle, quick up, quick down, portable theater. People would come in, set up a stage, get out of town, right? Then people figured out that they could do non-church related plays for a living. And they could write these things. And they could do 2 or 3 shows if they wrote them well enough, right? Like, this English guy, William Shakespeare. William Shakespeare's comedies are almost universally ripped straight out of Commedia scenarios, settings. He pretty much took a good Commedia story, hammed it up a little bit, and had the benefit of doing the show in the same place for weeks on end, installing it in these theaters. Maybe we put a trap door in so that when the servant falls, he keeps falling. That's great! I'll pay more shillings to see that again. And that's something worth noting. Commedia dell'arte was not something that was made for the noble people. It was very much like Shakespeare, who was also writing rude, bawdy humor. All of it was really more in line with a Seth Rogen movie modernly than anything that you would see winning Academy Awards. It was subversive. They didn't make fun of the broke people a lot, because guess who was watching the shows, right? But, rich people? Fair game. So we see Shakespeare start to learn from. There we go. Okay. We see Shakespeare hammering out Commedia conversion plays, calling them his comedies and selling hundreds of tickets a night. And then as time goes on, we see some other things sort of starting to come up, using these same basic ideas of stock characters, situational comedy. Wonder if that's still around. We kind of see some other things grow up. Around the time of the French Revolution, Molière, really I guess immediately prior to the Revolution, was writing some really great comedy called Comedies of Manners. It was very popular in that neoclassical era, moving out of the SCA period and into the early modern period. And again, we'd see a lot of the same stock characters. We'd see servants who were smarter than their masters, masters who were there for something, a strange out-of-towner who everybody feels just a little bit strange about, but he talks a good game, let's see what he's doing. Tartuffe, biggest play probably that Molière wrote, the one that most people recognize, is a really well-written Commedia scenario, again ripped right out of history and made into a big show. He renamed a few characters and retooled some things, but really the core of it, and a lot of that bawdy humor, that show's filthy, by the way. for the time, is all just right there. It's Commedia. We see some of the characters go on into opera. We'll talk about that a little bit more. We see it kind of split off into opera and into Punch and Judy type shows, the rude humor of the 18th and 19th centuries. American vaudeville is pretty heavily based upon Commedia dell'arte. So you'll see this a lot with some of those classic vaudeville performers. The Marx Brothers, the Three Stooges, they all kind of had their niche. They played the same basic character, put them in a different scenario, and let's go on an adventure. We're all going to laugh. That came from Commedia dell'arte. Modern musical theater, there's an awful lot of Arlecchino, who's a character we'll talk about in just a moment, in maybe the MC from Cabaret. Kind of this unintentionally dark and brooding thing that's played off really, really well as lighthearted and goofy while just jabbing with the commentary. And again, we see a lot of our stock characters starting to develop. The miserly old man, like Mr. Krabs from SpongeBob. The old man who thinks he's smarter than everyone else. The father-in-law and Family Guy, where they can just kind of go off on their tirade and they're very smart and they know it, whether or not everyone else does, or whether or not they believe everyone else does. The wise servant, who's predominant in a lot of comedies, right? We see it all the time. The servant knows more than the person they're working for and is actively working to keep things nice for them. It all started to really develop here. And I guess that really is a good place to bring us into the characters. Let's talk about who these stock characters were, so that we can talk about what they did and some tips for how you can portray them. We'll just go get the big one out of the way. The easiest one to recognize by their name is Arlecchino, modernized into the Harlequin, right? This is a clown. It's a comedic sidekick. Is sort of what he is now, what this character, and it's generally a male, has evolved into. The character wore a nice, well-fitted doublet later in period, but earlier they would have been wearing a patched-up tunic. This is a servant. This is not a very good servant, okay? This is a goofball. This is a servant who is fumbling, bumbling, constantly making mistakes. Sometimes the mistakes end up being a good thing. Sometimes they end up being absolutely destructive to great comedic effect. It's a very funny character, and Arlecchino, again, is one of those that kind of grew. There's a whole school of Harlequin clowning in the modern era that started with this character. It's worth noting that a lot of these characters wore masks. So Arlecchino is the most famous of the Zanni, which is the class of characters we're talking about right now. These are generally masked servants. Easily the most recognizable of the servant class of characters, right? He wore a mask that was vaguely cat-like and had a giant carbuncle right on the forehead from all of the falling. By the way, don't play Arlecchino if you're not planning to take a fall. He's very energetic, very exaggerated in his movements. Why, yes, I'm going to go to the kitchen, I'm going to get a pie, and then I'm going to eat the pie, and then I'm going to go back to the kitchen, and I'm going to get more pie. This is a very energetic character. And sometimes people will play it a little bit slower, but again, with that same motivation. He's after sex, food, and money, not necessarily in those orders. Not very reliable. He tends to fall asleep or lose his job. A common lazzo, which is something we'll get into later, but a common kind of stock joke that we can pull from, and that we see a lot of, is an Arlecchino bit. Maybe someone walks by with a pie. And we see this a lot in the, certainly in the Mel Blanc comics and things like that, and the cartoons of the 40s, 50s, 60s, even today. Someone walks by with a pie that smells good. And that lovable goofball character that just can't get anything right. Their head turns with the pie. They smell it, and away they go. That's a very common thing with Arlecchino, very specifically. He's food motivated. Dude's always hungry. Again, kind of a fumbling, loud, forgetful fool of a character, right? This is very much a cartoonish character. This is somebody very big. Later, again, came to lead shows, sort of as the shows and the style evolved. But again, just a simple black leather mask, vaguely cat-like. As a simple black leather mask, these things are molded leather, and it's very difficult to do. The big old carbuncle. He tends to be a foil against his bosses. He tends to misinterpret directions. Maybe they'll say, well, Arlecchino, go to the store and get a grape, or a bundle of grapes, and then go to the shipyard and get a sail. So he'll say, yes, store the grapes in the shipyard in the sail. And the next thing we know, there's now a bundle of grapes in a sail somewhere, which will fall down later, of course, to great comedic effect, right? This is the way this character works. His errors are his virtues as a comedic character. So that's the first, really, of the zanni, the servants, right? These are the people who are close in status to the people who are watching the show, while also being significantly separated from them. Again, the leather mask, which delineates the character and is very recognizable, certainly to the people in period, it serves to make it clear this is a zanni, this is a zanno, this is a masked character. I kind of know what this character is going to act like because I've seen a lot of these shows, right? So another character that kind of cropped up later in the period, but who is worth mentioning, was Pulcinella, who later became Punch of the Punch and Judy British puppet shows where the man and the woman puppet have the clubs and they kind of wail on each other. And there's really just the one or two Punch stories. But that came out of Pulcinella, who was a masked character, but was a masked character that was invented to represent kind of it was a male, it was an everyman at the time character. Think Peter Griffin from Family Guy. Adult, but adult who's very much trying to be like the people watching the show, if they were just that goofy. We don't see a lot of Pulcinella in period. I'm not really sure that it was done in the time period that we study. One that we see a lot of is Colombina. So this is a female zanni. She was not masked, and indeed, occasionally you'll see it in a modern production that they'll put a mask on her, but it's not horribly common. She was a comic servant, kind of playing the tricky servant role. Maybe the master, the employer, and we'll get into that in just a little bit, is scheming about something, and she sees an opportunity to make things work out better for everyone. Maybe the employer's daughter wants to get married to somebody. The employer wants him to marry somebody else. Colombina, she's wise. She's working in the environment. She's working in the house. She's working with the people. One moment. Sorry for the delay there. Recording this class, of course, it's hard to keep a perfectly controlled environment, and my cat was being a little bit of a jerk. Colombina was working very much in the household. She kind of knew how things worked. Very crafty character, one who, again, can scheme and put things together in a way that they tend to work out. Usually she ends up having a good time and benefiting in the process as well. Usually counterpointed by maybe another female servant. Franceschina is one of the other ones that we see in a lot of these plays. Usually plays more of a deadpan, straight character to Colombina's shenanigans. And then another character that we'll run into from time to time, and one who kind of developed a life of their own, is Brighella. This is another masked character, another masked zanni character. Brighella was a devious, self-serving liar. There's really no way about it. This is the servant who's trying to figure out how to get out of having to work for other people. What's in it for me? What am I going to get out of this? How do I win? How do I make this whole situation work for me? That's what you get with Brighella. He tended to wear a loosely fitted, white smock and pants, green trim usually, and he often carried a slapstick. By the way, slapstick comedy? Guess where it gets the name? It's a stick on a hinge, so when you swing, it claps, making a great hitting sound. Someone falls over, tumbles like they got hit by a slapstick, and everybody laughs. And often he carried this thing. He would wear a green, sort of a dark green. It was hard to do the green leather dyeing back in the day. And these were generally leather masks. And it'd be a half mask again, kind of right up here. He'd always have this kind of greedy look. I get to have that. Right? He'd often have a curled mustache. Really anything to give him a characteristic that this is somebody sneaky, somebody about their own game. Snidely Whiplash from, what was that from? The old Hanna-Barbera cartoons. There, we'll just sidestep it. Curly mustache, hooked nose, very common characteristics of Brighella. And what he would generally do is he would serve his master devotedly, as long as it worked for him. And he'd be a great servant, and do whatever helped the master, as long as he gets his, right? Now, anything that he could do to gain an advantage for himself, he would. He's fond of money. So if, for instance, somebody came to either of the master characters, the old men, we'll get to them, I promise, and says, well, I have a business deal for you. I have heard that left shoes will be going up in price next week. Maybe he goes and steals all of the left shoes that he can. Stockpiles them so that he can figure out a way to offload these left shoes, make a bunch of money. It often blows up in his face, usually to great comedic effect, right? Think Wacky Races, when Dick Dastardly tries to cheat in his car race. Car blows up. He's embarrassed. He loses. Whole big thing, right? Very similar. Lando in The Empire Strikes Back. He made the deal he had to take care of him and his at the expense of everyone else. Unlike Lando, this guy doesn't get a redemption arc. He's generally just kind of a jerk. Then we have, again, in the servant class, in the Zani, these are the servants who are usually moving the plot along, we have Pedrolino. Pedrolino is the progenitor of modern miming. If you've ever seen Puddle's Pity Party, the clown that looks sad and sings beautifully, that's a pretty spot-on Pedrolino costume. Long white sleeves that are hanging down past the fingertips, ill-fitted, white costume, white tunic, white trousers, with the little pom-poms. All of this is very, very common. The whole goal with this character is that it's very separated. He's in his own world. He may interact with the other characters, but he's really kind of removed from it. If a character is going to break the fourth wall, it's generally going to be Arlecchino or Pedrolino. If it's going to be a Zani class character, right? These servants. Because they're not as connected to the story and to the environment as everyone else. Pedrolino will often tend to provide comic relief. He'll stand behind another character. For instance, maybe the Capitano, the great out-of-town captain who has much to say and has been a noble hero and has slain many enemies with his giant sword, is talking and gesticulating. And then behind him you'll just see Pedrolino hold up a tiny little dagger. Well, this is not a dagger, this is a remote control. Or maybe we will see him mimicking other characters. So if somebody's gesturing wildly in the front, or moving over here, we'll see him behind them, kind of, gesturing wildly and moving over here. All of this with this very detached comedic separation from the real scenario. And again, this is usually somebody who later goes on to be instrumental to the plot in his own way, right? He'll generally kind of move things along through comedic effect. What we might see is that while Arlecchino is tumbling across the stage, well, somebody has to take care of business. Pedrolino will just very subtly take care of whatever needed to happen. And that's what we see. Now, these are all servants. We talk about this. These are the zanni. These are the servants. Who are they serving? What kind of dolt hires these people? And that's who we're going to get to next. These are the old men, the vecchi. Okay? There are really just two that we see in period. There are some that slightly predate and one or two that come after. Not really of any note to our particular academic interest in Commedia dell'arte as it's performed in our period. That said, the two that we've got are amazing. The first is Pantalone. He's a very greedy man. Generally wears red pants, believe it or not. Pantalone, pants. The clothing is actually named after the character. He was the first one to kind of move from tights to pants in that time period, kind of to get into the garment we call pantaloons and pantalones and pants now. So the garment is named after the comedic character. That's a thing you know now. But he would wear red tights, usually with a just obscene codpiece in the front, because, oh, by the way, this was rude humor. And people loved it. And he would wear this just horribly overblown codpiece with these red pants, this red tunic, sometimes maybe a black lined cloak, and always a red skull cap, kind of like a fez or something that would fit kind of like my hat here, right? Let's put that back. And it would just kind of cover the head. He was also masked. It's worth making note that a lot of these characters were masked. That's its whole own entire thing that I would be glad to do. It doesn't really fit in the scope of an intro class. But what he would wear is a mask with a long hooked nose, big bushy eyebrows, occasionally a mustache. Generally a pointed beard kind of meeting the nose. So he kind of had this look going on. Everything kind of pointed out. He may have his mustache. And let me tell you about Pantalone. The dude loves money. He is money motivated. Okay? He wanted the cash. How do I get richer? How am I going to have more money? How am I going to have more clout? I need to add another building onto the villa. I need to marry my daughter off to someone who's not going to need much of a dowry. Get her out of here. I'm tired of feeding her. I need to build. I need more. And he really liked status. A common thing that we see is this rich old goat going to visit the Doge, or preparing to go see the Doge's new estate, trying to impress the people of a higher social tier. And you know, for the people who were working in the service industries, your merchants, your lower economic status people in the time period, they loved this. He often ended up having a very bad time. Pantalone was the butt of a lot of jokes. If somebody at the end of a play ends up not paired off with somebody, well, that's a good time for everybody watching, because he's kind of a jerk. He's awful to his servants. He's always scheming. How can I get richer? Never minding the danger that he's putting his crew into, his family into. He's going to marry his daughter off to someone she doesn't love. Whole thing. We'll get to that in a little bit. It's all about the money for him, or about status. This is your climber. Why does he have to climb? He's already higher than all the funny people in the show. Was generally kind of the angle that people would take. And then we have his good friend, Il Dottore, the doctor. The doddering old wise man. He wore a very interesting mask. The vast majority of Commedia dell'arte masks kind of covered this region up here. Right? We'd get a nose and the eyes, and you'd see the actor's chin, jaw. Dottore is different. Big, honking, bulbous nose, big leather forehead, and even bigger, bushier eyebrows. To great comedic effect, he would wear this thing. They'd often rouge their cheeks as well, because, well, Dottore likes to have a glass of wine or 12 while thinking about whatever it is he needs to think about that week. We can think of him if Pantalone is Mr. Krabs, again from SpongeBob, or maybe Pantalone is the father from Sanford and Son, Red Fox's character, right? What am I going to do to get rich, or what am I going to do to take care of my business today? Dottore is going to be the absent-minded professor. He's going to, he has to make sure everyone knows he's smarter than them. He wears academic robes. He wears his mortarboard if he's got one. His speech is filled with malapropisms, right? He'll use gibberish. And we see that in modern comedy. Trailer Park Boys, there's a character who will occasionally just create a word that kind of works for him, or misuse a word to great comedic effect. Chuckled there, right? Same basic thing, right? And he's generally just an absolute bore to everyone else. So, for instance, Dottore, a character I've portrayed a few times, might walk into a scene and say, yes, I hear that the Doge is coming into town. You know, Doge, being a proper word for somebody who owns a bit of land, is a bit like a dog, right? They bark and urinate on things to mark it as their own. So tell me, my good friend Pantalone, what has the Doge done to urinate on you today? And what are you going to do to gain status with him? And we may see a tirade like that. And again, he's generally going to be wearing all black academic garb. He has a red spot on his cheek again. And he's not really knowledgeable, right? You know, for instance, maybe a sailor has come in from out of town and is wooing the women of the household. Maybe his daughter is being wooed. And instead of saying, a real fighting man probably wouldn't be bragging about this or that action that they took in the military. What he would instead say was, oh yes, I remember when the west winds blew from the east. I was in school, I was away in Venice studying, and the west wind, it sure enough turned right around on us. It was still the west wind. And they call this because of a repolarization of the clouds and how the wind is flowing. And it just turns around on its way back home. And maybe that's why your ship was wrecked. It couldn't be that you miscommanded it and sank it. And he'll believe every word of his own BS. I like the character. I've seen some very talented people perform this character to great effect. If you ever get the chance to see Duke Orlando Cavalcanti do this character, you're in for a treat. And then we have some other characters that are not masked. So again, you know, most of the people are masked, right? Arlecchino has his cat's mask. Brighella has his green top face. We see the red pointy mask, and again the hooked nose, the beard for Pantalone, right? We see Dottore's big honking nose, his forehead, wiggly eyebrows. We will see with some other characters some different things, right? For instance, what we'll run into with Pedrolino, no mask, but he paints his face completely white. Just powder it until it is completely white. It's the origin of modern mime makeup. We will see these characters, and then we see some people who are not masked. Generally, the female servants are not masked, because this is the first time women were allowed to be on the stage professionally, and it was pretty wonderful. And let's let these actresses have their moment. We'll put a mask on the dudes. Let them have this, is what I like to think may have been a thought process. It's conjecture. And then we have the young lovers, the innamorati, who are generally the biggest troublemakers in the whole show. And if they just stay away from each other, we wouldn't have any trouble. I actually really like these characters too. So first off, we have Isabella or Flamina or Hortensia. Pick a really common Italian period female name. Okay, we want something where we can use this name when we roll into town to make fun of these people, and them to pay us to do it, and we're not insulting anybody's daughter. So we're not going to use a very specific name. We'll use something generic. This would be the equivalent to an Isabel or a Jane, or it's just a standard common name that you can pretend you didn't know that was the butcher's daughter's name, who kind of looks like the priest. We had no idea when we rolled into town. We always use these same 3 or 4 names for this character. And she's a very bouncy character. She's in love with the idea of being in love. Okay? The worst thing in her world is that her Orazio, or her, what are some other ones? Flavio, Hortensio, Leandro, again, generic men names, doesn't love her so much, and she won't get to marry him. She wants to be married and out of father's home and go and be with this man that she loves. She's known him for 10 minutes. That's the humorous effect of this character. She's in love with the idea of being in love, and she is very emotionally prone to fits of comedic rage. And she'll get mad and lock herself in the room and refuse to come out. Or maybe the only way that she can marry this guy that she met at the marketplace is to dress like a man, which was high humor in these days. But dress up like a man and act like a man. And I'll sneak out and I'll go find him. And then we'll get married. Can you see where that plan goes wrong? And can you see all the places we can laugh about this opportunity? We contrast this with Orazio. He's generally a vaguely ambitious young man. He's generally, every time I've kind of seen the character, he's about to do something. He's maybe going to go off and join the Navy, see the world, sail. Maybe he's about to go to school somewhere far away. And he meets this girl. And he's all about it. Because he's a young man, and this is a girl who's showing interest in him. He's here for it. This is going to be great. I'm going to do whatever I have to get with her. This is going to be fun. I'm going to have a great time. She wants to get married. Aha. And sometimes we will see that effect. Or sometimes we'll see them just desiring so much to be together and to hide it from their parents, right? Maybe in the same scenario, Dottore and Pantalone don't get along well. One is the father of one is the father of the other. And they do not want their daughter and their son, well, getting married, joining their families. I don't want to call this man my brother-in-law. Well, I could call you many things because of my great education. One of the things I'd prefer not to call you is brother-in-law. And we can see where the kids can put them into a lot of really interesting scenario here. Also, generally, we can see attempts and flirtation with other characters. For instance, one of my very favorites, and one that I enjoy portraying the absolute most, Capitano. So this character was made, historically in period, as a very specific jab at a very specific, poorly behaved Spanish mercenary captain, Captain Spavento. So what we may see in a modern SCA Commedia, we may see him put on his hat with his big white plume, and he will walk onto the stage and he will say, "Bonjour, I am Capitano Frappuccino Grande Spavento." And we'll see this long drawn-out name with this glorious introduction. I am the captain of the ship with the tallest mast in all the fleet. He's usually not actually a successful military man, or one at all. He's got these huge boots, high boots, big, heavy, noble, rich, expensive leather boots that are just completely ragged out. Okay, this is broke and destitute, trying to look rich. We'll see exaggerated garters dragging behind him as he walks. We'll see an exaggerated ruff around the collar. Sometimes they'll wear a diagonally striped or slashed doublet. This is generally, again, someone wearing court attire that's ratty. He's never indigenous to the town. Capitano is not from here. He doesn't talk like he's from here. He doesn't act like he's from here. And there's no accountability for what he does while he's here, including anybody's daughter that just happens to be interested in Capitano. And who would not be? He's full of himself. Think Barney from How I Met Your Mother, right? Or Jack Sparrow. This is a guy who talks a lot. He's got a big game. When push comes to shove, he doesn't have it. A lot of big talk. Very small mast. He's here to make a name for himself. And the mask for this character is glorious. Half mask covering all this again, right? And a gigantic phallic nose. Up to about here. It's very obvious that this is a phallic symbol. Again, this was lowbrow humor. This was street comedy. This is the show you go see in the marketplace after everyone closes the stores for the night. And they loved a good bawdy joke. Really dialing it back because I forgot to put an 18 warning on the class. And a lot of what we will see in a scenario, right? Maybe the captain comes into town. He sees Isabella mourning the fact that she can't be with her Orazio because their parents won't allow it. And maybe he comes over and says, well, you're obviously a smart lady, and you're smart enough to know when to give up and when to pursue. And maybe you should cut your losses. And you are strong. You are strong enough to spend your time with Capitano. And she'll realize, well, yes, I am smart. I am strong. And I'm going to have Orazio. And they're not going to stop me. And he's left alone, embarrassed. It's a good time. Maybe if there's a foeman threat coming to town, he'll talk a huge game about his intent. I will cut them down myself. He doesn't show up. He'll find an excuse. Maybe he'll pay somebody to kind of dress like him and go fight the bad guys. That's a common Lazzo, which is a thing we're about to get into. The Lazzi that we've talked about are some of the stock jokes, the dramatic conventions in Commedia dell'arte. So first off, again, this was improvised. A well-planned Commedia show. One that is, to the T, scripted, ready to go, or as much so as you get in Commedia. You'll have a list of scenes. Every time a character enters the stage or exits, we call it a new scene. So we have a scene with the two old men, right? Dottore and Pantalone. And then that's the end of scene 1. Scene 2 happens immediately. No pause, no cut, no blackout. They didn't really have stage lights. Scene 2 begins when Isabella comes in. Scene 3 begins when the servants show up. And this is how the show is organized. And all of this is improvised. So they may know that, okay, in scene 1, we need to get to the point that the old men are not agreeing with each other. We need them to be mad at each other. We need Isabella to come in, and she needs to convey to her father that she's absolutely in love with this boy. And that it happens to be his son. Isn't this great? We get into the next scene. Maybe a servant comes in. Maybe Brigella shows up, sees that he has an opportunity to gain something out of this. And that's about as well scripted as these will get. And the reason that we can get away with that as Commedia performers is because we have, to work with these plots, certain physical actions we can do and certain jokes we can engage in called lazzi. So a physical action, right, you may see different things. Pantalone generally walks like this. He's a rich man. He's got something to prove. Dottore's got his nose in a book, right? Capitano walks in like he owns the place. Everybody has their own ways of carrying themselves. Arlecchino will stumble, fumble, fall to great comedic effect. Brigella's generally going to be sneaky about it, right? Colombina just walks right in. She knows what's going on. She knows all the business. She knows all these people, and she's going to play them to get things to work out for whoever she cares about, whether it's herself, maybe the daughter of the man she works for that she's trying to help. And they'll all carry themselves differently. And this is portable across a lot of shows. So we already know, no matter what Capitano's doing, he's walking in like he owns the town. And then they can go to their lazzi, their sort of stock jokes. Okay, so there are different styles of these. Okay, we have an acrobatic one. Maybe Arlecchino jumping from the stage out into the rows of the crowd to try to get himself out of trouble. Right? Maybe somebody pops Arlecchino really good with a stage hit. We don't hit our friends on the stage. We hit our enemies on. Don't hit people on stage. But a good stage shot, right? Ah! And he falls into somebody's lap, and then maybe tries to flirt while he's there, and steal some snacks, right? We can have the lazzo of the unspilled wine. That's another Arlecchino physical one. He's got his glass of wine. He's not going to spill it. His boss said, "Don't spill." So when he does a somersault to avoid falling, he doesn't spill. Yeah. Of course, the slapstick. Slapsticks are always fun. Physical fake slap's always good. Just lay it in right here, you slap here. And as far as the crowd knows, you just got smacked pretty good. Maybe we can see a defend me, right? Isabella has been horribly insulted by Brigella. He said something that was out of place for him. And the only person there is Capitano. Oh, well, Cappuccino, deal with this. Mispronouncing his name, or again, butchering the name Spavento, because everybody hated Captain Spavento. That plays to great comedic effect historically. So now we've got these two men having a duel. Surely they think for her affection, meanwhile she's off stage breaking furniture with Orazio, which is another lazzo, another common joke. Well, we noticed that when your father was out, we came back and there was a lot of broken furniture. You weren't seeing that boy, were you? That's a common one. We'll generally see Dottore. He'll like to use Latin, particularly if he's using it incorrectly. Latinus incorrectus, if you would, so that he can sound like he's fancy. Maybe instead of being attacked by a group of hoodlums, he's been attacked by hoodla. Yeah, that's a good one. Perhaps he will go exside. It's the opposite of inside. We'll see that. We'll see some of these have not aged well. There's a lazzo where anybody using a foreign language is just speaking absolute gibberish. Not going there. But it's a common enough lazzo. You know, maybe somebody comes in and makes unintelligible sounds. This is not English. Well, Dottore, was that Latin? Oh, it's Greek to me. There we go. That one I can avoid trouble for. Some other ones that we'll kind of see is the lazzo of the list. So we'll have a list of things that need to be done, a list of jobs, right? And would you believe it? They get it wrong or mispronounce it. I can actually show you that one really quickly, at least a piece of it. I have here from one of my corporate non-sponsors a little cup of original barbecue sauce. And you know, it's weird because when I, as Arlecchino, was sent to get the original barbecue sauce, I couldn't find it. All I could find was the original barbecue sauce. We still see this bit done a lot. Because it's gold. We'll occasionally see different things, maybe a wine glass with something other than wine in it that gets there through some comedic effect. Maybe the water from the barber who was giving a shave to Orazio, and he pours it over into the wine glass because he's not supposed to be there and he has to hide quickly. And Dottore sees the wine glass and he takes a swig. It's soap. Or maybe we will see again some Arlecchino Lazzi. We'll see him getting distracted by a bit of food, right? Or we'll see him just begin eating while somebody's telling him to do something. So someone's up there telling him to go do this, that, and the other, and he's just chowing down. And he's paying enough attention that he thinks. We'll see some other items. There are some things that we still see rather commonly. Let's say a female character gives attention to a male character, and he rather enjoys this. He'll take his hat and use it to protect his own modesty a bit, or maybe it'll just fly off. We can see that. Broken dishes. We're being sneaky, we're being sneaky, we're being sneaky, and we broke a plate. Great, they know we're here. There's a whole bunch of more adult-oriented Lazzi that I'm really having to stay away from in my notes here. And then again, there are some really fun ones that we can see a lot of, and a lot of things that we've seen historically even carried through. Rabbit season, duck season, rabbit season, duck season, duck season, duck season. Wait, what? We'll see those, what we call the changing argument, or the yes and no Lazzo. We'll see the single syllable. This is another one. Arlecchino's eating. He's the only one that knows what just happened in that other room. Well, Arlecchino, what's going on in there? Well, Arlecchino, is Orazio okay? For now. We'll see these effects. We'll see the maniacal laughter that turns into tears. We'll see all sorts of things like that. Some things that we see rather frequently that are Lazzi at this point. Well, we have to have this over by dark. Maybe the screen's dark. We see people fumbling about on stage. They end up in a compromising position. A lot of fun. Okay? We can do a lot of this. Maybe everybody kind of figures out, well, hang on, that's the man that I came to the party with, and that's the man that I was in the closet over there making out with, and who is that? And then they'll say, well, that's... Everybody has their realizations at the end of the show. Speaking of realizations at the end of the show, I have about 1 minute and 18 seconds left of this thing. So, what I will tell you is that this tirade has been a brief introduction to Commedia dell'arte. The best way to learn this, it's a bit like fighting, cooking, or arguing with me, is to just do it. So, I would recommend watching some performances. There are a few available on YouTube. Again, anything from I Verdi Confusi is really good. I Forenzi, if they have anything up, is really a good group to watch. Get me and Master Matthias and a few of our buddies alone for about 20 minutes. We'll get bored, we'll write a show, we'll put it on. It's happened. And better yet, come do it. I promise you, if I'm not actually fighting or actually reading a scroll in court, and you say, hey, you want to come do Commedia? Yeah, I do. And you'll understand why. I hope you understand why a little bit more after this course. Again, this has been Lord Knut Bjornsson, wishing you all good night and good luck. Nope, can't use that one, that's copyrighted. Hoping the rest of your day goes well. How about that? That doesn't get me sued. Good night.